You did not summon the nightmare. It emerged unannounced, carrying with it a presence that felt far too real to dismiss. While ordinary dreams vanish like scattered mist at dawn, this one stayed, not just in memory, but in sensation. You can still feel it in the quiet moments, when the world pauses and something deep within begins to stir. There is a reason this nightmare refused to leave you. Its purpose was never to scare you in passing, but to disrupt something buried. It reached past your defenses and touched something essential, something you may have spent years avoiding. Carl Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And within that darkness, the nightmare waits, not as a threat, but as a revelation. Most people try to push such dreams away, believing that fear is the enemy. But fear has always been a signal, not a destination. The nightmare did not come to punish you. It came because something inside you is ready to be seen. Not by the outside world, but by you alone. Its symbols may seem senseless, even grotesque, but beneath the surface, they speak a language older than words. The nightmare reveals truths your waking mind is too proud or too fragile to face in daylight. It does not flatter, it begins in stillness. The body rests, the mind loosens its grip, and somewhere in that twilight space between waking and sleep, a door inside you creaks open. Through it, the nightmare enters, not like a stranger, but like something long familiar, something that has always waited for the silence to return. What rises in that darkness is not chaos. It is precision. The nightmare does not arrive by accident. It is the visitor sent by the part of you that remains unseen, unheard, and unclaimed. It comes carrying symbols instead of sentences, images instead of explanations. It speaks in the only language the soul truly understands: feeling, vision, presence. Jung knew this intimately. Dreams, he said, are the hidden language of the unconscious, and nightmares are its most urgent expressions. They do not come to entertain. They come to disrupt, to challenge, to reveal. And often they come when the inner balance has tipped too far from truth. You may remember the fear first, the racing heart, the loss of control, the sense of falling into something without shape. But beneath that fear, if you look closely, there is design. The nightmare knows exactly where to lead you. There is something inside you that has gone ignored for too long. The nightmare is its return. Most people wake up and try to forget. But forgetting is a form of self-abandonment. If you turn your back on the nightmare, you turn your back on the part of yourself that created it. To walk with this visitor is to begin the journey of remembering. Not the memory of events, but the memory of essence. You are being asked to remember who you are beneath the noise of your roles, your routines, and your reputation. The nightmare came because a deeper intelligence within you decided it was time. Time to stop pretending. Time to stop avoiding. Time to meet yourself in the one place where lies cannot survive, in the cold, clear mirror of the dark. And so, the visitor in the night is not here to harm you. It is here to wake you before it is too late. There comes a moment, often deep within the nightmare, when the terror becomes personal. The face you see emerging from the dark is not entirely unfamiliar. There is something in the eyes, in the posture, in the way it moves, that feels eerily close. You may not recognize it instantly, but a part of you already knows. What you are seeing is your own reflection, shaped not by mirrors, but by memory, rejection, and fear. Carl Jung named it the shadow, the unseen counterpart to the image you show the world. It is made of everything you deny, disown, or refuse to integrate. Every thought you deemed inappropriate, every desire you buried, every emotion you silenced to keep peace or play a role, all of it has gathered in this silent twin who walks beside you, just beneath awareness. The nightmare does not invent the shadow. It reveals it. And in doing so, it strips away your illusions about who you are. The terror arises not just from what the shadow looks like, but from the recognition that you have always carried this part of yourself without ever fully facing it. The moment you see the shadow clearly, your world begins to tremble. Not because something has been added, but because something has been uncovered. The mask of the persona, the socially approved version of you, polished and predictable, starts to crack under the weight of the truth. You realize how much effort it has taken to maintain the mask, and how easily the nightmare dissolves it in seconds. You were taught to be good, to be strong, to be acceptable. But what happened to the anger that wasn't allowed, the sadness that was called weakness, the desire that was labeled shameful? It never left. It simply descended into the dark, where it waited. And the longer it waited, the more power it gathered. The shadow does not speak in language. It enters your nightmare with symbols that disturb precisely because they belong to you. It wears your gestures, mimics your voice, reflects your pain. And in that moment of confrontation, you see not a monster, but a memory of everything you were never allowed to be. You may feel shame, even revulsion. But the shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you that was left behind in the pursuit of approval. Its rage is the rage of neglect. Its sorrow is the sorrow of being unseen. And its return, though terrifying, is an invitation. To reject the shadow is to reject your own depth. To face it is to reclaim your humanity, your complexity, and your wholeness. Jung knew that real transformation requires this encounter. Without the shadow, growth becomes performance. With it, growth becomes truth. The nightmare reveals this part of you because words would never have been enough. You had to see it, feel it, run from it, and finally stop running. Only then could you begin to ask the real question, not why the nightmare came, but why you lived so long without it. The figure you saw in that dream, the one who terrified you, is not your enemy. It is your echo. And perhaps now, for the first time, you are ready to hear what it has been trying to say. In the waking world, you wear a name. You speak with certainty, hold your posture just right, and play the part you've learned to perform. You walk through your days as if the mask is your face and the routine is your will. But deep down, something doesn't feel quite whole. And when the nightmare returns, it does not haunt the person you pretend to be. It reaches straight through that image and speaks to the one you've forgotten. Jung called that image the persona, a necessary mask, but a mask nonetheless. It helps you function, find place, earn acceptance. But over time, the mask begins to harden. And when you wear it too long, you begin to confuse it with your identity. You start to believe that being agreeable is the same as being good, that silence is wisdom, that composure is strength. You believe you must suppress your wildness to be worthy, your pain to be respected, your confusion to be loved. The nightmare does not respect your mask. It was not sent to soothe your social image. It was sent to interrupt the illusion. When you dream, the persona no longer holds. Your unconscious does not care about your job title, your relationships, your reputation. It remembers the person beneath the performance. That is why the nightmare feels so personal. It does not show you random fears. It shows you the consequences of self-abandonment. The persona might convince the world that you are fine, but the dream knows otherwise. It knows when you've been silent too long, when you've agreed to things you never wanted, when you've looked in the mirror and found a stranger staring back. The nightmare is not a punishment. It is a revolt. It is your psyche's attempt to tear down the false walls that have kept you from yourself. It is a rupture in the smooth surface of your life, and through that rupture, something real begins to emerge. You may wake from it sweating, shaken, even angry. But the discomfort is not a sign of danger, it is the labor pain of truth trying to be born. The parts of you that have been locked away for the sake of appearances are no longer content to wait. They push through your dreams, not because they are cruel, but because they have been ignored for too long. To live only through the persona is to live a half-life. It may offer safety, but not meaning. It may give you approval, but not peace. And when the nightmare pulls you beneath the surface, it invites you to remember what the surface has erased. The lie you live while awake is not a conscious deception. The nightmare is the opening. It breaks the crust of your known life and leads you into the forest of the unknown. You may not recognize the terrain, but your soul does. It has walked these paths before, in silence, in suffering, in longing. Now you return, not as a child of comfort, but as a seeker without armor. Within the nightmare, space twists. Time folds. Logic dissolves. What is left are symbols that pull on you with strange gravity. You may be chased through impossible corridors, lost in a city you almost recognize, trapped in a house with shifting walls. And though your waking mind calls it nonsense, another part of you knows this is your map. You are being shown the architecture of your own unconscious. Each symbol is a doorway. Each figure is a guide or a gatekeeper. These are not the random scatterings of sleep. They are the sacred fragments of your inner world, rising at last to be seen. The descent is frightening not because it is unfamiliar, but because it strips you of control. In the world above, you learn to predict, to organize, to manage perception. But here, in the dream world, you are no longer in charge. You are being shown, not asked. You are being challenged, not consoled. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. And the first step is to leave behind the illusion of wholeness. The nightmare does that for you. It tears open your comfort and exposes what lies beneath. It drags you, if it must, into the very depths you swore you would never visit. You may want to escape, to wake up and pretend nothing happened. But the descent has already begun. And once it begins, the only true way out is through. This is where the real work begins, not in resisting the fear, but in walking with it. Not in deciphering the dream like a puzzle, but in allowing it to reshape you. The nightmare becomes a guide not because it is kind, but because it is honest. Every step deeper into the unseen is a step closer to yourself. And though the path is dark, the darkness is not empty. It is full of the parts of you abandoned when you chose survival over authenticity. In this realm, the nightmare is not a threat. It is a torch. And if you are willing to follow it, it will lead you to a place that no surface identity could ever reach. Inside the nightmare, everything feels amplified. The hallway is too narrow. The voices are too distant. The moment stretches beyond time, and yet passes in a blink. Nothing makes sense to the logical mind, but something deeper within you responds. This is not confusion. This is a different kind of clarity, one that does not speak in words. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates in symbols, not sentences. And the nightmare is its most urgent form of speech. While the waking mind demands explanations, the dream offers images that bypass logic and strike directly into feeling. A locked door, a crumbling stairwell, a silent scream, these are not just horrors. They are metaphors carrying messages your conscious self has long refused to hear. You may not understand why you were chased through that forest, why a child stared at you with hollow eyes, why the floor gave way beneath your feet. But each of those moments was chosen. They were drawn from the depths of your own psyche, crafted from the materials of your personal history and emotional truth. The nightmare uses exaggeration and distortion not to mislead you, but to grab your attention. It knows that ordinary language has failed. The symbols must shake you awake. They are sculpted from memory, shaped by repression, and infused with emotion. They show you what you cannot yet admit to yourself. That figure you feared, that place you avoided, that strange repetition of time and space, all of it belongs to you. Not in some abstract or mystical sense, but in the real, psychological architecture of your inner life. The dream reveals what you have tried to keep silent, and the nightmare delivers it with force, because subtlety has already been ignored. There is meaning in every moment, if you are willing to look beyond fear. The nightmare does not need translation through external interpretation. It needs presence. It needs you to stand still, feel what it evokes, and ask yourself what part of your inner life might have created this scene, and why it demanded to be seen now. Often, the images that seem the most terrifying carry the greatest truth. The collapsing ceiling may represent the mental pressure you refuse to acknowledge. The monstrous face may reflect the anger you buried. The endless fall may mirror the fear of surrendering control. And while these symbols appear frightening, they are not trying to harm you. They are trying to communicate, to make the unconscious conscious. The language of nightmares is not a language of cruelty. It is a language of urgency. And when a part of you has been ignored for too long, the dream must grow louder. Pain becomes the voice. Fear becomes the messenger. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when the nightmare begins to shift. The fear remains, but something in the terror starts to feel less chaotic. A realization flickers through the darkness, not loud, not certain, but present. The nightmare is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to show you something that could never reach you in the light. Jung saw the nightmare not as an enemy, but as a guide sent from the deepest layers of the unconscious. It appears when the conscious mind has grown too rigid, too certain, too detached from truth. The nightmare breaks through that rigidity. It brings chaos, but the kind of chaos that clears the ground for something new. Beneath the panic, there is a seed waiting to be seen. This is the truth hidden inside the terror. The nightmare comes when you are finally ready to hear what could not be spoken before. It brings the pain you tried to bury, the rage you pretended not to feel, the desire you locked away behind silence. But it does not do this to punish. It does it to heal. And healing, as Jung understood, often begins where comfort ends. The figures that chased you were not demons. They were truths wearing the only clothing they could find. The collapsing rooms, the impossible tasks, the distorted faces, all of it was built from the materials of your own inner life. And each symbol, no matter how frightening, carries within it a piece of the self you have forgotten. Fear arises not because the nightmare lies, but because it tells the truth too clearly. To meet your nightmare without running is to reclaim the part of you that created it. That part has been living in silence, carrying the burden of everything you denied. And when it finally breaks through into your dream, it brings with it not only darkness, but direction. The nightmare teaches you to stop asking what is wrong with you, and instead begin asking what is unfinished within you. It points toward your neglected instincts, your unsaid truths, your unlived life. The very images that once made you recoil now become the doorway to a different kind of freedom. You may not be able to explain how you know, but after a nightmare like that, something has changed. You are not who you were before you faced it. There is less pretending in your voice. There is more silence in your listening. There is a shift in how you carry your pain, not with shame, but with understanding. The gift inside the terror is not relief. It is revelation. And revelation does not soothe. It awakens. The nightmare has done its work not when you feel better, but when you begin to live with more honesty, more depth, more courage. You will still feel fear. But now you will know what lives beneath it. And in knowing, you will no longer be owned by it. The nightmare brought you to the edge of your own illusion, then tore through it. What you saw in that place was not a fantasy. It was a reality that your waking self had refused to face. Now that it has been seen, it cannot be unseen. You are no longer just a mask holding itself together. You are a soul remembering what it is made of. Jung described this moment as the return of the self, the deeper, timeless center of your being that exists beyond persona, beyond ego, beyond fear. The nightmare does not awaken the self. It clears the path so the self can come forward again. That is why it had to be violent. That is why it had to be honest. The self does not speak loudly. It arrives quietly, with the weight of knowing. It does not command. It reminds. And what it reminds you is that the part of you feared most, the part that screamed and chased and distorted itself into monsters, was never separate from you. It was you, calling out to be reintegrated. Now, the fear that once controlled you begins to soften. You recognize it not as a signal to run, but as a signal to listen. You walk through your days no longer pretending to be only one thing. You are contradiction and you are whole. You are made of wounds and wisdom, confusion and clarity. And you no longer need to choose between them. This is not the end of the journey. The nightmare was not a final destination. It was an opening. The work of integration continues, not through dreams, but through choices. Every time you respond with honesty instead of habit, every time you acknowledge a feeling instead of repressing it, every time you allow yourself to be seen without a mask, you are continuing the path the nightmare began. The self does not seek perfection. It seeks truth. And truth is not polished. It is raw, messy, alive. You will still falter. You will still be afraid. But now, fear no longer drives you. It guides you toward the places where your attention is most needed. The nightmare has done what no comforting thought could. It has broken you open and let the light return. But this light is not borrowed. It is your own. Hidden in the shadow, buried beneath years of roles and silence, it has waited for your willingness to descend. Now it rises, not as fantasy, but as force. You are not who you were before the dream. And you are not meant to be. You walked through the nightmare and came back changed. But now you see that waking life carries its own illusions. The roles you inhabit, the expectations you perform, the pace you keep without question, all of it begins to look less real, less permanent, less necessary. The nightmare shattered your sleep. And now, strangely, you are awake in a world where so many still sleep with their eyes open. Jung understood that the unconscious is not simply a basement of old memories. It is a living intelligence that constantly attempts to restore balance. And when the balance has been lost for too long, it sends a signal powerful enough to break the surface. That signal takes the shape of a nightmare. Not to torment, but to awaken. Not to punish, but to remind. The reminder was not about fear. It was about forgetting. You had forgotten your depth. You had forgotten your wildness, your sorrow, your anger, your longing. You had forgotten that your soul is not bound by your image, and that healing does not come from pretending to be fine. It comes from facing the truth you buried inside yourself and learning to live with it in your hands. The nightmare is over, but the dream continues, this one, the waking dream of your daily life. And now you have the power to move through it with more honesty. You carry within you a map shaped in darkness. You know where the hidden doors are, where the false exits lead, where the silence becomes too heavy to ignore. You no longer walk as someone who fears the fall. You have fallen, and you have returned. You no longer need to push away the strange, the ugly, the wild parts of yourself. They belong to you now, not as burdens, but as voices within a greater harmony. This is what it means to live awake. Not to be free of pain, but to meet it without flinching. Not to be above fear, but to listen when it speaks. Not to be finished, but to be real. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness does not come from the light alone. It rises from the union of all that you are, the parts you show and the parts you hide, the roles you play and the truths you reclaim, the silence you carry and the voice that finally speaks. The nightmare gave you that voice. It did not gift you peace, but it offered you purpose. Not comfort, but clarity. And if you carry that clarity into the days ahead, you will see with different eyes. You will speak with a different rhythm. You will no longer chase what is missing, because you have begun to remember what was never lost. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege is not granted easily. It must be earned. And for many, it begins with the night that breaks them open, the nightmare that changes everything. Now, that moment is yours. Step forward with it.